to the ranking member to deliver a closing statement.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much, and I want to thank all of our witnesses for what was a truly enlightening and educational discussion, which I would recommend to every U.S. citizen to come check out, and certainly business school students, economics students, law students, students of every type, because this has been a fascinating and important discussion. I don't know that it advanced the campaign against ESG. I think it reaffirmed the basic principles of the free market and to allow asset managers like the distinguished treasurer of the state of Illinois to do their jobs. Now, Mr. Chairman, I started by showing a graph demonstrating that money invested over the last decade in a large cap ESG influence fund did substantially better than investment in the Standard & Poor 500 Energy Index. And that came not from us, not from the Democratic staff of the House Oversight Committee, it came from Bloomberg News. And I would like to submit the article for the record just so we can clarify that, if that's okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now, that graph, which is quite dramatic, showing that over a decade your money would have been better put in an ESG-defined fund than just the general S&P 500 Energy Index, which I wasn't aware of. But that graph seems to support Mr. Frerichs' basic point today that ESG considerations are totally consistent with an asset manager's fiduciary duties to maximize shareholder value, and arguably compelled by it. That's certainly the interpretation I think that Mr. Frerich has offered today, that it would be in disregard of your fiduciary duties simply to try to close your eyes to environmental, social, and political concerns. For example, we talked about Norfolk Southern. If it had come to the attention of investors before the derailment, which obviously caused a tanking of the value of the stock, that Norfolk Southern was making a lot of money, but it was cutting corners on safety, and it was laying off workers to save money, but making it more dangerous on the rails, that's something that should be taken into account. I've not heard a single argument from the other side that it shouldn't be taken into account. You could say the exact same thing with Purdue. Mr. Frerich testified, I was using it as a hypothetical, he said they actually came to Illinois. He faced the question whether or not to invest in Purdue, and Purdue was coming back with staggering profits, but he looked behind the curtain, and he didn't like what he saw in terms of Purdue getting people hooked on OxyContin, oxycodone, and he said, that's not a good long-term investment for the teachers and firefighters and cops of Illinois. And so he avoided it. He was doing his fiduciary duty. That's what it means to do your fiduciary duty. It would be, at least arguably, a violation of it to disregard all of those kinds of concerns. I mean, the Massey Energy Company coal company in West Virginia was making tons of money up until the Upper Big Branch mine disaster, which killed 29 miners. If you looked more deeply into it, they had hundreds of violations with OSHA and with the Mine Safety Organization. That's something that asset managers shouldn't take into account. That just seems way off to me. But look, in the final analysis, it's all about free choice. If Illinois wants to look at the mine regulatory safety record of a particular company, I know you don't have mining there, but if you want to look at Purdue's actual record, what they're doing with OxyContin and oxycodone, and Utah doesn't want to look at it, well, that's your choice. You do it. Different states can define the fiduciary duty differently. In Texas, they seem to be defining the fiduciary duty as doing whatever the oil and gas industry wants, or the gun industry. Look what they just did in Texas under this whole anti-ESG, anti-woke campaign. They pulled the leash on municipal governments in the state and dramatically interfered in the free market to protect the oil and gas industry and the firearm manufacturers by telling local governments that they could not make contracts with certain private banks, which the legislature deemed to be too woke on those issues if they, took policies or made statements that were considered too woke by the legislature. Okay, well, what was the upshot of this anti-woke legislation in Texas? Well, don't take my word for it. Check out a study by Wharton professor Daniel Garrett and a Fed economist, Ivan Ivanov, which found that this anti-woke sledgehammer in Texas is costing the cities and towns of Texas, meaning the taxpayers of Texas, an additional $305 million to $532 million in additional interest payments every single year. Now look, if Texas wants to spend an extra $500 million on interest payments to make a totally political, totally partisan anti-woke statement, then have at it. That's up to them. At some point, the people of Texas will wake up to it, but that's their choice. But don't interfere with the right of Illinois and all the other states to look at all of the factors that actually influence the valuation of companies. Nobody should think, by the way, that this movement is striking a blow against global elites, which we've heard a lot about today. If you're interested in that, you should join our investigation into Donald Trump and Jared Kushner, who brought home $2 billion, not million, $2 billion from Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates for a company he created the day after the Trump administration ended. So don't talk to me about global elites. That's the Trump family business, trafficking in global elites and their businesses. And he collected millions of dollars in unconstitutional foreign emoluments from Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Indonesia, Egypt, a whole bunch of countries that patronized his hotels and his golf courses. So I don't want to be lectured to by anybody about global elites, because I was here for the 4 years of the Trump administration. Now, my friend the chairman asked the question, well, what would happen in China? Or what would happen in another authoritarian regime with ESG? Do they have ESG? Absolutely not. That's the difference between a free market democratic society and an authoritarian or totalitarian society. All that matters is what the state rulers tell you to do. Well, here the state rulers want to say everybody's got to invest in big oil and big gas, even if they don't think it's the right thing to do from a fiduciary perspective. They want to try to compel people's choices. Why don't we let the free market operate instead? In the final analysis, these decisions are being made not contrary to the gentleman's statements before, not according to morality, but according to economics. That's what we heard from the excellent treasurer of the state of Illinois today. And those are the kinds of decisions that are being made across the country. Now, Americans have the opportunity to say, we don't want to patronize businesses that are supporting China, General Xi, or Putin in Russia, or any authoritarian regime. But when they're managing pension funds, they're not making a moral decision, they're making a financial decision. And if they're withdrawing from that, they're saying it's not a good bet. That's not a good bet for the people. I know the Attorney General of Alabama said, well, you should disregard all moral criteria. I think he was asked about communist China, he was asked about Nazi Germany. He said, just maximize profit. I understand that view. Okay, that's not the view most citizens have, but a lot of the asset managers say it's not a good bet to invest in Marcos in the Philippines or General Xi in China or Orban in Hungary or what have you. But that's up to them. And we shouldn't be interfering in one direction or another. And that's the problem with this whole anti-ESG thing. It is, even though it's dressed up as a critique of political investing, it's all about promoting political investing and promoting a political agenda. But luckily, I think the asset managers see it for what it is, the businesses see it for what it is, and the people see it for what it is. And I don't think it's going anywhere. So it's going to be on to the next battle in the culture war. I yield back to you, Mr. Chairman.